Hello, welcome back to OConnor Racing. This is a 1978 Yamaha YZ250. It's a vintage rebuild. Pretty excited about this. One thing I definitely like doing, motorcycles more than anything, but this vintage stuff is just really cool. It just breaks up all the monotony of the shop. What we've got is a ported cylinder. We painted this, we glass beaded all the cases. Everything's clean. I got our bearings all figured out. We're going to start putting the bearings back in, and the way I'm going to do this is just sweat them in. I use MAP gas, and I'll monitor the temperature right around the area where I'm going to put the bearing in with an infrared heat gauge and get that up to about 235 degrees. I'm not going to put these in the oven. They have fresh paint on them, and I'm just going to take my time and knock these in. But you should be able to get it right at the temperature, drop them in, and then blue Loctite on the retainers. So we'll get all of these bearings in both sides first. Well, I went ahead and got all of the bearings in there. If this is something you've never done, and I point this out in a lot of videos, and at a chance of sounding redundant, you may not watch all of them. So never hit a bearing. Don't pound on this thing, especially putting a punch on it and just smacking it. You want to do all of this with heat, and like I say, just get this case to a temperature where this bearing will just fall in. And then we've got a few retainers in here, and I just took some blue Loctite 243, and use that to secure the bolts. An impact driver, just give it a couple of whacks till everything's seated. Went ahead and oiled all the transmission bearings. I have not oiled the crank bearings, and I'm not going to do that right now. Next step is going to be go ahead and put the transmission in, and this is going to be a trick. Because of the design of this engine and this transmission, we're not going to be able to put it together traditionally the way I like to do it, which is just to put my get my gears in, and then get my shift cam in and drop the forks in, and then just drop the pins in. I can't do that on this engine, and the reason is because of these E-clips. Most modern motorcycles, these are buried in the case. So back then, these are through holes in the case, so they need these to retain it. So with that in mind, I can't drive these. I can't put these shafts in after I get everything put in the way I want it to. So I just use a little trick. I just take a zip tie, and it's going to act as an extra hand, and I'm just going to lift this up and drop it right into the right side case as you're sitting on the bike. This particular transmission has one washer at the end of the shafts, so what I do with this, I just take a little bit of Vaseline just to stick it there so it won't move around, and I know I got it. So next thing I'm going to do is drop this transmission in. Well, believe it or not, that works pretty well. Everything is initially in the hole that it's supposed to go in on the other side. At this point, it's really not going to move much. I'm going to cut my zip tie off and then just jockey everything in slowly by hand. Okay, I went ahead and installed some E-clips, and then bench shift the transmission. You have to turn the shaft and turn the cam at the same time. What locks this cam in, this engine's kind of unique, is it's locked in off the drain plug. It's got a funky little drain plug with a hole in it. And there's a spring that goes in here, and then a little plunger, and that plunger presses against the shift star, if you will, on the camshaft. I'm not going to put that in yet. It makes it actually a lot easier to bench shift it. So you want to make sure you got all your gears neutral. When you're going to notice one thing. Hopefully you will hear that. Neutral, actually. There it is. Listen. That grinding sound. That's this shaft touching the inside of this case, and the reason it's doing that, this will clear up once the other case is on and the sprocket is retained. This will pull this shaft off of this. So I've already confirmed all of that, and this transmission turns over fine. So if you run into that, don't worry about it. It'll clean up when you put your sprocket on. Next thing I'm going to do is get a crankshaft in this thing. Okay, so I'm going to drop the crank in. I've had this tool a long time, and it works well for me. What I'm going to do is use my MAP gas. I'm going to heat the end of this punch up, just this piece on it right here. I'm going to get that up to between 235 and 250 degrees, and once I acquire that temperature, and again I'm just going to monitor it with this infrared heat gun, I'm going to drop it on the inner race of this bearing. I'm going to let it sit there no more than 35-45 seconds. What that's going to do is it's going to swell the inner race, and I'm going to be able to take this crankshaft and drop it right in there, no resistance. That's basically the next step. Well, that crank went right in there. Next thing to do is go ahead and put your alignment pins in. These went in a little bit tougher than I like to see them, but that's what it wants. Everything's clean, so we get those put in. Next thing I'm going to do is paint the cases, both sides, with 1104 case bond. You can use 1184 or 1194, made by 3Bond, and then seal these things up. Well, here's where we are. I went ahead and put all the bolts in, torqued everything down, 7.5 foot-pounds, and I had to make a couple of provisions here. One thing that I noticed on this engine, this breather, there it is right there. This breather was actually not there. They had a plate that just went over this, kind of like a baffle, but it's still going to spit oil out everywhere. So I was able to go to my local Napa hardware store and just whittled off this part of it, made it straight, and then put it in the hole. So now we can put a vacuum line on this, and it'll work properly and not leak oil all over his brand new engine here. Next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust this piece. And this is actually the back side of the shift cam. There's two pieces that go in here. We've got a spacer and then a new C-clip, and we'll throw that in there. Or a snap ring, I'm sorry, snap ring. Next piece I'm going to install is, for lack of a better word, I'm just going to call it a freeze plug. It's just a little plug that goes over the assembly we just installed the spacer and the snap ring on, and I'm just going to put 1104 case bond around the outer edge of it just as an insurance, so nothing's going to leak. Alright, next thing we're going to do is install this old school shift cam actuator, and it just goes right in there. One thing I will tell you is check this piece right here and make sure these are all bent over, all these pins are tight, because if you get a piece broken, this pin will just fall right out. So I went ahead and I oiled everything, and you just put your shift shaft in and just line it up just like that. Let's have everything together, just move everything around, make sure everything's working the way that it's supposed to, and then install that E-clip. Next thing I'm going to do is install the crank seal. And if you're doing this crank seal, see how it's got the little like castle pieces, I guess you want to call them, up here. That goes down. And another thing, we saw this when we took it apart. The last guy that put this together, and it's a 79, I'm sure this thing, or a 78, it's been apart many times. They peened this over. I don't think that's a good idea at all, because you've got a little retainer that's going to hold it in there. So I'm just going to put some blue Loctite on the outside of the seal, some PC seal grease on the inside of the seal, and then install it. Went ahead and got the seal in. And the next part I'm putting in is the retaining bracket, and see how that's rocking? That's no good. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to bend this flange so this thing does what it's supposed to do and applies positive pressure on that seal. Got my retainer in. The next thing I'm going to do is install the primary gear. But before I do that, there's an O-ring that goes in here. So I drop my O-ring in. I'm going to go ahead and oil my crank bearing on this side, drop the primary in, and get my nut on there. Okay, now that I have the primary on, and I haven't torqued it yet, I will. I'm going to, when everything's all set up, I'll torque everything at the same time. I'm going to put the kick idle gear in, and what you're going to see with this, Yamahas are kind of weird. A lot of them are just different. This particular one, you don't have a snap ring on the bottom. You just put the little washer on, put the gear on, the next washer, and then the snap ring. I'm going to take this apart and oil it and put it together for real. Next piece I'm going to assemble is the kicker assembly, and a couple things you want to watch for here. There's a washer here, don't lose that. I'm going to put some Vaseline in here, and actually this is recessed, so that'll sit right in there. And the other thing is, where the spring is, right here, there's a plastic alignment bushing. That opening has to go over the spring right there, and then next step is just drop that thing right in there. Everything's already been oiled, and lock that spring right there. That's it. Here's a good reason you should be working out of a manual. I don't care how smart you think you are, you're gonna miss things. Just looking at this looks very suspect. There's a baffle in here for windage, whatever. I did just confirm it in a microfiche. Part's discontinued, you can't get it. But I did get a look at it, so we're going to go ahead and just make something for this, and I'll show you what I come up with when I'm done. Alright, that's what I came up with. Just a little baffle in there, and I'm sure it's going to be fine. Next thing I'm going to do is put the clutch actuating lever in. I went ahead and installed my seal, oiled my bearing, and this piece right here is just going to drop right in, and then you're going to retain it with that screw. And that's what it looks like when you're done. While I'm on this side of the engine, and again, we've got a pretty fresh paint job on this, it looks pretty mint. I don't want to go smashing up the clutch cover after and scratching it up, so I'm going to put all my seals in on this side. Again, on the crank, this is the time to oil the bearing before you put the seal in. So 2-stroke oil on the bearing, don't overdo it, and counter shaft seal and the shift shaft seal. Same thing with this crank seal on this side. You got that little castle part, I call it. Little bosses, they go down like that. Got all my seals in, everything with Loctite, PC seal grease, and I'm going to put my stator in next. My stator in, next thing I'm going to do is put the flywheel in. I've already installed the key, and you're going to drop the flywheel right here, as my buddy Scott says. That's a cute little sucker. I told him quit being gay. So we're just going to slide this right in here and then torque it up. Alright, the next step is there's a washer that goes underneath the collar, and you just, what I'm going to do next is, this is all pre-oiled, drop the actuating shaft in. You got a ball, drop the ball in. Then I went ahead and lubed my basket. There's another washer right on the top, and I don't know if you can see it, we did our clutch mod on this basket where we drill the holes, preserve the life of the clutch. Some of this stuff is getting kind of hard to get. Then just rotate your gears and drop that right in. Okay, next step is go ahead and just drop the inner basket on, and then the lock washer. I usually don't like to reuse this stuff, but we're having a problem getting some of this stuff, so this one's kind of neat. It's got 3 spots where I can bend it over, so hopefully it'll line up once I torque the nut on. And then we're going to get this nut torqued up, and again we're going to get the primary nut over here tightened up, and we'll go from there. Alright, we've got everything all torqued up. Next step is to install the clutch plates. You get steel plates and you have fiber plates. You're going to alternate them. Start with a fiber plate first, and as far as the steel plates go, if you look at this plate, feel it, you're going to see one end is rounded, and one is kind of square and sharp. Put that square and sharp flat side down and the rounded side up. First plate that goes in is going to be a fiber plate. Alright, next step is, what I like to do is I loosen this nut, and I'm going to install the pressure plate, all the springs and all the bolts, and then I'll show you how to go ahead and adjust this bolt. This is how you align the clutch actuation arm. There's a little, I'm going to call it a tit. If everybody's done laughing, I'll explain. There's a little tit on the case, and there's a hole in this arm, and you just adjust the shaft on the other side with a screwdriver, and I'll show you what it does. If I turn it in, it forces this arm out, and again, keep in mind all of these plates are under pressure right now, so you just get it till it lines up here, and then I really got to get a cameraman. And then you just go ahead and hold your screwdriver here and tighten that nut, and your clutch will be all set, ready to, it's all adjusted, it's all set. Next step's pretty obvious. I'm just going to put the clutch cover on, and one thing that is interesting, you can still get these from Yamaha. That's the part number for the gasket. So we're not going to shoot this, just put the cover on, and then we'll go to the top end next. Hey, we got a new Wasner piston here. The next step, I'm going to go ahead and put the clip in on one side of it, get everything oiled up, put my top end bearing in, and get this piston hooked up. One thing to keep in mind when you put the clips in, the opening should face either straight up or straight down. We went ahead and put the piston on. The next step is to check the end gap of the rings. That's pretty easy to do. You take the bore diameter in thousandths of an inch. In this case, it's 2.818, and you multiply it times 0.004 thousandths. you get a total of 11,000. So I'm going to set this, check it, and make sure that it's all set at 11 to 12,000. So we'll be fine. And this is how you do it. You just drop your ring in there, make sure it's level. I like to use a piston to push it in and get everything nice and level. And just take a feeler gauge and just get it in that gap and make sure you got plenty of room, and it's done. I'll check the other ring next and then install the rings on the piston. Alright, both rings checked out fine. I'm going to install them on the piston next, and just keep one thing in mind. Usually, see that little mark on the right on the ring? The ring has a mark on it, and these 2 strokes, it always goes up. It may not make any difference, but if there is a mark, it's a good idea to just put it up. That's what the manufacturer recommends, so just install it with that number up. We're all set with the rings. The next thing I'm going to do is put the gasket on and put our Hurricane Hannah style ported cylinder in. Pretty extensive port work on this. Nice fresh bore. We'll just throw this on next. Alright, went ahead and put the cylinder on. Base gasket's all set. Next thing, we're going to put the cylinder nuts on, if that's what you want to call them. That's what they look like. Some old school stuff right here. And we'll get these all torqued up. Okay, we got our cylinder on. This is our cylinder head. I have a couple of them here. I did notice something kind of neat in this head. I don't know how well you can see it, but there's a boss down there. And this chamber is not, it's not actually hemispherical. They used to keep the plugs in the back, but before that even, they put the plugs in from the side, so they just kind of reuse their casting. But putting the head on is pretty simple. I just put some ultra copper on the copper gasket. I'm going to put the cylinder head on with some washers, new nuts, and torque this down to 21 foot-pounds. Well, just when you think you're done, you run into another problem. This is the original drain bolt, and as you can see, the head's pretty beat up on it. I'm definitely not going to reuse it. And someone, in their infinite wisdom, to make parts as cheap as humanly possible to sell them to you guys, injection molded something like this. This is plastic. I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist. I am not putting a plastic drain bolt in a motorcycle, especially a dirt bike. So what we did, I think this goes to a Kia or something, I don't know. Had a really big shoulder on the outside, kind of a screwed up gasket. We just cut the shoulder down and blew a hole through the center. This is pretty important. This is your dentant for your shifting mechanism. Believe it or not, is in your drain plug. So little substitute part. We got this to work, and my customer, we're actually going to, knowing that all of these parts are discontinued, it's kind of a shame that you got something like this, and I struggled a little bit trying to find stuff to make this work. It's kind of a shame you got a decent retro bike laying around, and you can't get a drain plug for it. So we're actually going to make a run of these. We're going to make 50 of these things, and you'll see this on my website. I will be offering them soon. I'm going to heat treat everything, so we're lucky enough to figure something out on this. But that's the last step, is get the drain plug in, check the shift mechanism, make sure everything's working, and send this on its way off to Washington. And here's our final product. YZ250. OConnorRacing.com. Thanks for watching.